You really can be doing everything perfect, but if the internal guidance system is crooked, then everything comes out crooked. You're following the directions correctly, but it's the wrong set of directions. Does reading the book on bikes mean you can hop on a bike and get cruising? Heck no. Does it remind you to get all of your props? Heck yes, it does. You know those ridiculous demands and expectations and all those other things that frustrate you and compel you to act in ways that sabotage yourself, thus creating disasters resulting in outcomes leaving you even further from what you want than where you started? Yeah, you're taking those and you are telling them to stick it. You're telling them to shove it. In other places that the sun may have problems reaching the places where you're going to stick these expectations. All right. But first, here's what you are learning. The color busted, so forgive how this handwriting looks, please. What people want often is straight. It makes sense. It makes sense. Typically, it really does. What people want makes sense. However, often what people do ultimately gets them opposite of the result they want, which is strange. However, this is because people act based off of what they believe more than what they want. That takes precedence. What you believe takes precedence over what you want. So if and when there's conflict, what you actually believe deep down is going to be a greater influence on the actions you take. And in a lot of cases, they definitely they feed off of each other appropriately. So you believe one thing and you act in accordance to what you believe to accomplish what you want. This is the discussion that's happening, all right? So what you're doing, you got to drop an oops in the comments. If you've ever gotten frustrated with yourself when you fell short of some crazy demand that you knew was crazy, drop an oops down there. It's good to know. Essentially, if what you believe is crooked, then even if you act logically, because people act aligned with their beliefs, if you act logically, if what you believe is crooked, then the results appear crooked and distant from what you want. And I've got a fun picture to describe that in a second. This means that in an effort to make sense of the conflict between what you're doing and what you're getting, you have to rationalize in a crooked way to fill that gap. In this case, these are self-sabotaging thoughts to make sense of the discrepancy, where I do everything I should and I keep getting fatter, my metabolism is slowing down. That's how you make sense of it. Wow, she is so lucky. Why do I have to work so hard? This is so unfair. You fill the gap with fairness. Well, that got screwed up. May as well start over tomorrow. Fill in the gap of frustration tolerance. Or I must be too old to make progress. Or I've always been this way, so I'm doomed to be this way. These are the sorts of conversations you have when what you're doing and what you're getting seem to be disconnected from each other. They're separate. They're divorced even. Indeed, this is why results can be so frustrated even when you're doing everything perfect, because you might be doing everything perfect. You really can be doing everything perfect. But if the internal guidance system is crooked, then everything comes out crooked. You're following the directions correctly, but it's the wrong set of directions. If that makes sense. So here's the story. Imagine a rocket ship that has all of its actions pre-programmed to go to the moon. So here is the launch pad, and here is the rocket. Pew, pew. Here's the rocket, right? This. All of the actions are pre-programmed, assuming that the ship is launching from the United States. This is what you're assuming right now. All of everything is assuming that it's launching from the United States. Boop. Excellent. There we go. Now, the computer thinks it's launching from the United States. Imagine now that it's actually launching from Russia with all of the directions assuming it's launching from the United States. The rocket does everything perfect, but the results are disastrous. Now suspend your belief system for a moment and pretend that the computer system is sentient, meaning it can think for itself. The computer believes it's in the United States. This is the belief. The belief is that the platform it's launching from is in the United States. And it does everything perfectly based off of that. So here is the desired result. The desired result is to get to the moon, perhaps. Everything arranged here in a way that makes sense. Wow, getting to the moon. So all of the actions it takes are logical. All of the actions it's taking are logical. Well, what happens is that it ends up on the not moon. It ends up on the not moon. Why? Because even though the path of the actions are logical, in accordance to the beliefs, the result is way off. Because the platform that it's launching from is contorted. Does that make sense? If the computer believes it's in the United States and does everything perfectly based on that, but ends up on the not moon, can you see how the rocket ship could be frustrated as all heck and eventually just hit its own self-destruct button? Because the reality is that the rocket ship is doing everything perfect. And yet, what's happening is that it's going all over the dang place, and eventually it gets confused. And then it self-destructs because it's frustrated and it's impossible to correct that. And again, anyone from the outside outside who only sees the actions, they see how it might be confusing or ridiculous or even humorous that everything turned out that way. Like, hey, stupid, you're launching from Russia using software that's meant for United States launch. Of course it got all whacked out. Indeed, it's easy to think the rocket was acting stupidly until you realize it legitimately believed in the United States when it launched, and then all of a sudden everything makes perfect sense. Confusing things make perfect sense when you understand the underlying beliefs. Meanwhile, the longer the rocket waits, the more off course it gets, the more frustrated it becomes because it keeps telling itself, demanding that it had to have been, it must have been in the United States when it launched. What's going wrong? Eventually, the expectation deviated too far from reality and it blew itself up. That makes perfect sense why it would blow itself up. Indeed, what people do looks crooked and wacky and ridiculous, right? However, when you find out what people believe, then everything they do all of a sudden makes perfect sense. It really does. So when you find out what people believe, then what they do, even if it looks silly and ridiculous, it makes perfect sense then. They're actually acting logically. It's just the beliefs that they're launching from are crooked. I hope that makes sense. They're acting logically based off of distorted beliefs. Therefore, you can act in ways that make perfect sense, but result in frustrating and discouraging outcomes, which then lead to self-sabotaging thoughts and actions. You hit the self-destruct button because the straight logic was based on crooked and distorted beliefs. And when you realize you're acting logically and the result is ridiculous, well, then it causes this strange conflict that ends up causing things to self-destruct. Chances are, when you look a bit closer, these beliefs are probably demands. They're probably demands of conditions that must be met. And that means that even when the tiniest thing is off, the system gets frustrated and promotes essentially self-destruction, right? Sabotaging action tendencies within the person. So back to the beginning. I'm going to use Olga here as an example because Olga is amazing, been a client forever, and is happy to share the story. What she wants is logical and reasonable, being fitter.
Aren't we all?
However, often what she was doing ultimately frustrated her, and then she would act in a sabotaging way, thus getting the opposite of result of what she wanted, gaining weight perhaps, which then also made her upset at her upsetness and around the merry-go-round she goes. This is because people in general act based off of what they believe more than what they want. For instance, again, Olga's desire to be fitter is a reasonable and logical desire to have. There's plenty of evidence to support the outcome of being fitter. Although as time went on, Olga started doing strange things that were in direct conflict with what she wanted. She binge ate on weekends. She drank with friends frequently. She snacked all the time. She would be mad even when she did make progress because the progress was too slow. Eventually, the whole process got so frustrating to her, the only thing that appeared to make any sense was her giving up. And in a moment, you'd see why that did make perfect sense, especially when looping back to the rocket analogy. Anyone on the outside would be confused or even find the whole situation humorous. Well, of course you failed, Olga, you dork. You binged on weekends, you drank at happy hour, you had a drawer full of snacks, and you got discouraged, even when you were making progress. It turns out even though her desire to be fitter was logical and it made sense, it was straight. The belief system she had around food and eating was distorted. It was crooked. Therefore, when she acted in perfect alignment with her beliefs, it generated results that violated the expectations of what she wanted. She acted logically and still got negative outcomes every time, and this recurring frustration is enough to make anyone batty and give up. When she was coached to look a bit deeper at her belief system around food and eating, then from the outside looking in, it became apparent that what she was doing made perfect sense, and the frustrations of her shortcomings were warranted. Olga's belief system around food and eating circulated around four key demands. Olga must be full all the time. Olga had to take food from people when they pushed it on her to be polite. Olga needed to be social with alcohol because she was scared of being a bump on a log. And Olga can't be fat. She can't stand it and knew that she should be losing 3 pounds a week. Thusly, when she fell short of the absurd demands she placed on herself because the outcomes conflicted with what she wanted, disasters resulted and her frustrations were justified. It was at this point Olga's focus in TKN was to violently, persistently, and ruthlessly change this distorted belief system. Since everyone acts in accordance to what they believe rather than what they want, even if what you want makes perfect sense, your beliefs surrounding what you want must be congruent with that outcome so that your automated behaviors line up with your preferred outcomes. Otherwise, everything is uphill and eternally frustrating. Even though there's progress, the effort is always too much when comparison to the work required. The effort is always too much for the reward. The first step for Olga to violently, persistently, and ruthlessly challenge this distorted belief system was to lay out her beliefs like she just did. Write down what they were essentially. Now that it was written out this way, how it conflicted with what she wanted, and then rewrite a belief to have it make more sense, and a reasonable response so that her daily behaviors were more likely to align with the outcome she desired. So her first demanding and distorted belief is that I must be full all the time because if I'm hungry, I lose my temper, I get hangry. A reasonable preference to that demanding and distorted belief is I prefer to be full. So so I eat satisfying meals at regular times. Another demanding and distorted belief she had was I have to take food when it's offered because that's polite. If people don't like me, it's terrible. And a reasonable preference is that I do prefer to be polite, so I thank people for thinking of me and offering and then say I'm good. Another demanding and distorted belief she had was that I need to be social with alcohol because otherwise I'm a bum and a buzzkill. And the reasonable preference there was that I prefer to be social more than I prefer to drink, so I spend more time with friends that appreciate quality time. The final distorted belief that she had surrounding food and eating was that she can't stand being fat. I can't stand it. I know I should be losing 3 pounds a week or else I'm a useless fat slob. Now here's a reasonable preference to that demanding and distorted belief. I can be fat and I can stand it. Otherwise, I'd be dead. And I prefer to make progress and I prefer to get closer to what I want than further away from it. Olga wondered if this would all work the first time around, writing these things out. Heck no. That would be a ridiculous demand. It's okay to prefer what works, and that's what gets you closer to what you want. When you've trained yourself like this for years, you got to train yourself out of it as well, and TKN helps with that. What you can do is carry around a card or make it the background on your phone and repeat it whenever you're getting frustrated or jilted, and also say it before each meal, like a little prayer to yourself. Or in the bathroom mirror when you wake up, put stickies everywhere. Take those demanding beliefs and tell them to shove it. Every day, all the time, violently, relentlessly, and stubbornly challenge and dispute these harming beliefs. So here's what you've learned. What you want probably makes perfect sense, and it probably is grounded in logic and it's reasonable, the preference you have. It's possible that even if what you want makes perfect sense, your outcomes are confusing and frustrating even if your actions make sense to you. When the belief system is crooked, you act straight in accordance to your beliefs, but if your beliefs are crooked, then you start going straight and you end up in a completely different place. And a person can only be frustrated for so long before they give up or rebel or give up by rebelling. If you're doing everything perfect and the results are off and that frustrates you and prompts you to give up and rebel or give up by rebelling, then it's probably because you're acting straight but on crooked beliefs. So if you've ever followed directions perfectly and got a wacky result, but got royally PO'd and realized the directions were wacky, then throw an oops in the comments. It's good to see that others had made goofs like this. Until next time, Dr. Kashey is out.